Is the iPad 8 old news at this point? It's been more than a year since it became available, and Apple has released newer models of every single iPad, including the iPad 9. But are there more powerful chips and newer features reason enough to upgrade, or can the iPad 8 still keep up with the competition? The things that I've done the most in this iPad are gaming, which was really surprising to me because I didn't expect to reach for this iPad quite so much. I watched a lot of content on it. I definitely use it for messaging, for email, and to reply to your comments. And then finally, I used it for browsing the web and with all the productivity apps that I use to manage my channel. It is capable of editing both photos and videos. I've tested both, so I know it can do them, but it wouldn't really be the option that I would pick because I prefer to do those things on my main workstation. The iPad is Apple's entry-level model, so it isn't designed to compete with the higher-end models in terms of features, but it's a super interesting option when you look at value. I chose to go with the 128 gig model because I knew that I'd be installing a bunch of larger games, and with the iPad 8, the only options were 32 or 128. Now, if you're only using the iPad for content consumption, then 32 gigs would work. But iPadOS and the system data take up just under 10 gigs of storage, and I knew that the remaining 22 gigs just wouldn't last for what I was planning on doing. And now, over a year later, I know that it was the right decision. So I'm using right under 50 gigs of storage, and I have plenty of room for this device to last me for the next bunch of years. So for me, the storage isn't really a reason to upgrade, but what about the rest of this stuff? Now, as far as size, I think that the iPad 8 is in the same category as the iPad Air 4 and the 11-inch iPad Pro. Now, of course, it's not exactly the same size, but as far as portability, the differences are negligible. It's also identical to the iPad 9 in terms of size and shape, so there isn't really a reason to upgrade in that regard. From a design standpoint, there are a few things that I think are important to mention. So visually, I know that it's still the older design with the larger bezels on the top and the bottom. So there are aesthetic implications, meaning that you may not like how it looks, but there are also some practical ones because we're getting a smaller display in a larger footprint. The home button on the bottom doesn't really bother me. Again, other than the fact that we could have had a larger display if there were smaller bezels all the way around and if we had the newer style Touch ID that we have on the iPad Air 4 and the iPad Mini 6. Now, the two areas where I did notice some friction are the port and the speakers. So first, the port is a Lightning port, and as far as convenience, I use the iPad 13 Pro and I use the AirPods, so I have Lightning cables all over the place, so it's not really an issue for me. I also use the iPad Max, which I cannot believe come with a Lightning port. Like, we're talking about $500 headphones that use a proprietary and less powerful cable, which is just shocking to me, but then again, they sold out immediately, so go figure. Now, back to a regularly scheduled program about the iPad 8. If you're not an iPhone user and you don't have these Lightning cables all over the place, then I can see how this port would be an inconvenience. Now, the other thing I want to mention has to do with the speakers. If you look at the entire iPad lineup, this is definitely at the lower end, both in terms of quality and configuration. So the quality is not really an issue. I expect the more expensive iPads to have better audio. Now, the configuration actually does make a difference when it comes to gaming. Now, because both speakers are on the bottom, when you're playing in landscape mode, the sound only comes out to the right. So when I'm running around in PUBG, which I really like to play, but I'm terrible at, I wouldn't really be able to hear where sounds are coming from. With the exception of the iPad 9, which has the exact same configuration, every other iPad has speakers on both sides, which are noticeably better at conveying direction. Now, to be totally fair, I never really game with the speakers on. I'm always either wearing headphones or a headset. And in that context, the iPad 8 and the iPad 9 are my favorite iPads because they have a 3.5mm headphone jack. So I can use any of my PC headsets, plug them in, and I get perfect audio and a better microphone. Now, with the other iPads, you can use an adapter or a USB-C headset, but because they plug in right in the middle, a lot of times it's right where I'm holding the iPad and it's a little bit less comfortable. So if you ever see me playing PUBG, I can't promise that I'll help our squad, but I'll have really good audio and then hopefully be a little bit entertaining. Now, the display is another feature that I get a lot of questions about. And in particular, can I tell the difference between this display and the fully laminated display on the iPad Mini 6, the Air 4, and the Pro? If I'm playing a game, watching content, surfing the web, or using pretty much any app, I can't really tell the difference. It's only when I look at the edge where I can see the air gap, and mostly because the bezels on my iPad 8 are white. On the iPad 9, all the bezels are black, so it's a lot harder to notice where that air gap begins. Now, if I'm using the Apple Pencil, I can see the separation between the tip of the pencil and the content that's being created, But that's not really an issue for me because I'm not an artist. I just use the Apple Pencil to take notes, to sketch a little bit, and then to mark up and sign documents. Now, if you are an artist, I would recommend that you choose an iPad with a fully laminated display, and if you're not sure what the difference is, watch this video right here. Now, the one other meaningful difference that I notice on other displays is ProMotion, which is Apple's adaptive refresh rate of up to 120 Hz. It's only available on the 11 and the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Now, personally, that's more of a nice to have than a requirement. Like, I appreciate it when I have it, and I don't really miss it when I don't. With the iPad 8, I think that I got a great display for the price. And speaking of great prices brings me to today's sponsor, Best Buy, which is running a $100 off special on the Fitbit Sense. This is Fitbit's most advanced smartwatch. It helps manage stress, and it has innovative sensors that track health metrics, sleep, and activity. The one that I got is silver stainless steel and sage gray, and personally, I'm most interested in 3 features. So running a YouTube channel means that I'm working around the clock, so I'm not the best at maintaining a consistent sleep schedule. So I like that this device can track my sleep and help me build better habits. Now, because I want it for sleep, I can't charge it at night. So I love the fact that the Fitbit Sense has a 6-day battery life, and if I'm in a bind, I can get a full day charge in 12 minutes. Finally, I want voice assistant integration so I can always stay connected to the smart devices that we have around our home. Click the link in the description to learn more and get $100 off your Fitbit Sense, and thank you again to Best Buy for sponsoring this video. Now, another strength of the iPad 8 over the past year has been the battery life. Now, I recently published a battery drain test of all the current iPad models, and I was shocked at the results. At the same time, I can tell you that the battery on the iPad 8 has been outstanding. Now, I always overlooked it because it's an entry-level iPad, but with a medium-sized form factor, a smaller display than the iPad Air and the 11-inch iPad Pro, and a less demanding processor, I can easily get through a full day of use. Now, of course, I can't game for 10 hours straight without needing a charge, but I don't really expect to be able to do that on any portable device. Now, I just mentioned the processor, and the iPad 8 has the A12 Bionic chip, which is the same chip as the iPhone XS. With the iPad 9, Apple introduced the new A13 Bionic. Now, for all of the things that I do with these iPads, in actual day-to-day use, there really isn't much of a difference. Now, I talked a little about the port earlier in the video, but there's one other limitation when it comes to this Lightning port, and it has to do with the types of accessories that you're able to use, and in particular, external SSDs. Now, because this port is more limited than something like USB-C, most of the external SSDs that I tried to use didn't work. Like, I would get this error that said, cannot use accessory, and then whatever the name of the accessory, this accessory requires too much power. And this would be the case even if I was using a dongle and I was plugged into an additional Lightning cable. So if you plan on using an external SSD, I would choose one of the other iPad models that has a USB-C port. Now, another advantage of every other iPad with this more powerful port is that you can edit videos in LumaFusion right off of the SSD without needing to copy the files onto the iPad itself and then filling up the internal storage. With the iPad 8 and the iPad 9 for that matter, I can preview the files on the SSD, but as soon as I drag them onto the timeline, the entire file would be copied over to the internal storage. And that's where I would very quickly fill up even 128 gigs of storage. And when looking at the camera system on the iPad 8, I stand by what I initially said. It's definitely on the lower end of the camera systems when compared with the other iPads, but for me, it doesn't really matter. The only camera that I really use is the front-facing camera, which I use for video calls, and in that context, I only really need it to be so good. Now, if I was buying something now, I would definitely buy the iPad 9 over the iPad 8 because I would get an even better front-facing camera with center stage. And that's a feature that uses the wide-angle camera to track a subject as it moves through the frame and then zoom in and out to make it look like the camera is following it. Now, when I use my other iPads for FaceTime or Zoom calls, I really like having this feature enabled, and especially if I'm moving around, but realistically, for the most part, I'm sitting right in front of my iPad, so it's not really a major advantage. When it comes to the rear-facing camera, I pretty much never use it on any tablet that I own other than to maybe scan documents. Now, I tested this one and it's fine, but I think most people are gonna have better cameras on their mobile phone, and they're unlikely to get a ton of use out of this one. So I paid $429 for this iPad 8. It's the Wi-Fi only model with 128 gigs of storage. I'm super happy that I chose to upgrade the storage because there's no way that 32 gigs would be enough for me. I still use my Apple Pencil and a Logitech keyboard that I got for it, which work great. So overall, I think that it was an outstanding value, and you should click right here to see how it compares with the iPad 9. Hopefully this video was helpful. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.